half hour. Apologize for the typographical error in the email. So Sandy, I'm not housing them, planning to use the hypotheticals.
I know, because we were like,
I think she's going home.
I'm like, okay.
Housing the hypotheticals.
I was like,
I'm planning
putting them
to
away.
use the
Putting
hypotheticals.
them away. What are you doing? Just shelving them?
Yeah.
Everyone saw that. I haven't heard the end of it yet.
Always check your emails and watch out for what they call it.
I figured you were using Surrey on your side.
Yeah.
I guess real bad ones don't say that.
So what I'd like to do, and I haven't handed up the how you write yet, and we'll probably maybe do that on Thursday as sort of an introduction to the delinquency stuff too. I want to work today on the Richard Ortiz case that I just sent you, and I'm going to do something a little bit different. One of the handouts is actually an excerpt from part of his Chin's case. Everybody has it. It says direct examination of Adam Troy by attorney Jill Mansfield. So actually, I want us to sort of to do this aloud, but I realize you're just getting the case itself. So take a look at the other handout that says attached are relevant documents in the case of Richard Ortiz. And let's do this. Rather than you just sit and read it silently, can I start with Karen here, who's chewing a chocolate bar right now? And if you could read the first paragraph out loud, and we'll just go around.
Attached are relevant documents in the case of Richard Ortiz. Lawrence High School has filed a petition in the juvenile court alleging he is a school offender. He has filed a motion to dismiss. Half of the class will represent juvenile and half will represent the school to argue this motion. These documents are based on a real case, and in fact, Richard's friend, Fred Martinez, was a real person who was in fact murdered. While your assignment mainly involves the Chin statute and case law, as well as standards for dismissal of cases, you should also consult the materials regarding youth, school violence, and sexual orientation. Note that these events occurred before the anti-bullying law went into effect.
Why don't you just read the next sentence and then we'll go to Joe.
Richard Manuel Ortiz is an honor student at Lawrence High School. He moved to Lawrence with his mother from Cortez, Colorado in December.
School principal and supervisor of attendance, Adam Troy, has alleged that Richard assaulted and battered another student with a hockey stick, which prompted the school to take disciplinary action. Before that, Richard allegedly attacked a boy after school, throwing a brick at him. Although neither of the boys were seriously hurt, the school's position was that Richard had violated rules prohibiting fighting, and Richard was given in-school suspension for a week as punishment.
The week he did the suspension, Richard did not fully complete the assignment that the teacher, Mark Hamill, had assigned. Richard and two other students who were on suspension for fighting each other met in the computer lab for the week at Hamill's request. The students were required to do online research for the first 4 days related to school violence, and then write an essay on the last day of their suspension. Richard, however, did not write an essay at all. He scribbled at his desk, he looked out the window, and he finally turned in a list rather than an essay devoted to what teachers and administration, not students, should do.
When Hamill reported this to the principal, Troy called Richard's home immediately because he wanted to schedule a conference with him. His mother answered, and she was told that Troy wanted to see them both the next day to discuss ways for Richard to not resort to violence. His mother asked if the meeting could be held at lunchtime so that she would not miss any work. Richard did not show up for the meeting because he was not in school that day. His mother showed up and said Richard was not feeling good and stayed home. Richard's mother revealed that she was concerned that Richard was about to be involved with a gang. She frequently worked on Saturdays, and the previous Saturday she had seen Richard in the park while she was on her lunch break talking to some youths who she knew to be gang members. She questioned him about this later. He insisted he was only talking to them. They ended up getting into a quarrel, whereupon Richard blurted out that if Freddie had been in the gang, he would be better off. Freddie was a friend of Richard's from Colorado. Freddie was brutally assaulted by a group of students after school because of his effeminate behavior. Richard never told his mom exactly why.
The principal discussed Richard's violent behavior with Ms. Gomez. He also discussed the last incident that occurred during the suspension. Troy told Richard's mother that Richard was supposed to write an essay. The subject was to be safe schools, how students and faculty can work together to ensure safety and peace. Richard wrote not an essay, but a bulletin list entitled Tips, How to Make Schools Safer. This list included mostly things teachers and administration should do. When Hamill saw the list, he asked Richard why he didn't include what students should do, whereupon Richard took the list, which he had drafted on the computer and had printed out, and handwrote at the bottom, students should take up arms if harassed for any reason. Troy concluded the meeting by telling Ms. Gomez the school was going to file a chintz petition.
Mr. Troy met with Richard the next day and showed Richard his paper, explaining that besides his trying to hurt someone again, the purpose of the in-school suspension seemed to have failed. Rather than his discussing ways in which students and faculty could work together, he came up with a list of requirements for faculty and administration, excluding any actions on the part of students, except for his afterthought scribbled script calling for students to respond with weapons, which really scared and concerned the principal.
Richard said that he thought he had complied with the purpose of the exercise, which was to research and then report about how to make schools safe. The principal then sent him to the counselor, Candace Bergeron, who reported later that, due to confidentiality, she could not relate to anyone what Richard had said, but she could say that she was concerned that he was resorting to violence as a way of dealing with a multitude of personal issues.
Richard says that the group of boys had called him fag and queer as he was walking home alone, prompting him to throw a brick and flee. Richard also told you that a group of students stood around as he was getting ready for gym class, taunting him about being in the wrong gym class, that is, asking if he wouldn't rather be in the girls' gym class. Richard said that that was the last straw and he did not want to end up like Freddie. As for the essay, he says he has the right to do the assignment any way he chooses.
Okay, just a couple of things I want to point out in the package before we do the piece of the trial. So this is the Chin's application, Chin's petition, the motion to dismiss, but I want you to look at the affidavit. Few points in the affidavit because we're only going to hear from Adam Troy, the school official. So the affidavit obviously is part of Richard's facts, who says that he was walking home one day. Actually, there were a few incidents that he talks about in the affidavit. One was the incident in gym class when he gets picked on and picks up a stick to defend himself, according to Richard. Another, and he receives a detention for this incident because the boy he hit suffered a broken nose. The other incident is the after-school incident. So he's walking home after school. The same boys are making fun of him, and he throws a brick at them. So keep that in mind as you hear Adam Troy's testimony shortly. So I need volunteers, and let's assume that Adam Troy has been sworn in and is going to be testifying. So I need somebody to read as Adam and become Adam Troy. I need Attorney Jill Mansfield to question him on direct examination. And then I also need attorney, I forgot what I called the other attorney, Nicholas Beck, to cross-examine Adam Troy. And
So
also
Beck
to
is
make-
representing Richard Ortiz?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So any volunteers?
You just want us to read it?
Yes, that's all. All we're gonna do right now is read. Who do you want to be, Stephanie?
I can be Jill Mansfield.
Okay, so you're gonna ask Adam Troy questions. Adam Troy, Adam Troy, Adam Troy. How about Ed? Adam Troy?
Sure.
Okay. And then if you want to switch, just so you won't be tired, Ed, on cross-examination, we can just pick a different Adam Troy. You ready? Want to be Adam? Amy will be Adam and getting cross-examined by Nicholas Beck. And Sandy, you're sitting too close, though. Were you projecting it?
Yeah, we're
Cross-examine.
good.
All right, okay, all
I think you
right.
hear us. Oh, well, yeah, we're good.
And when we do the directive, Adam, how about somebody else play Nicholas Beck to do the, there's a few objections in there. Anybody want to do that? You can do that, Karen? Okay, all right. So again, assume he's, Jill, you can start right
Okay.
away.
And who's Alan Troy and? Okay.
Oh, that's funny that the two are here next to each other, so make sure you project.
What is your name?
Adam Allen Troy,
What is your occupation?
principal at Lawrence High School,
How long have you been in this position?
3 years.
What did you do before then?
I was a principal at Inglesby Junior High School in Drake, Massachusetts for nearly 4 years.
And prior to that?
I was an English teacher at Inglesby for about 15 years.
What are your educational qualifications?
I have a Bachelor of Arts in English and Secondary Education and a Master's in Education.
Do you have any other special training or expertise relative to education?
I attend trainings and conferences organized by the Massachusetts Teachers Association and the Massachusetts Department of Education, as well as federal agencies.
What subject matter is covered in those trainings?
These trainings involve a wide range of issues, such as student violence, recognizing, reporting neglect and abuse, truancy and school offender problems, student searches, students' rights to freedom of expression, and protection against harassment, discrimination based on race, color, sex, religion, national origin, or sexual orientation.
As an administrator, how do you implement as policies and procedures some of the things you learned in the conferences?
Well, we revised the student handbook to cover new issues, such as the rise of school violence. We draft new policy as new legal protections and obligations arise. For example, our harassment and discrimination policies were rewritten a few years ago to include a prohibition against harassment and/or discrimination based on sexual orientation.
Your Honor, I would like to introduce Lawrence High School's anti-harassment policy and discrimination policy as exhibits number 1 and number 2 respectively.
No objections.
May they be admitted into evidence, Your Honor?
Fine.
Now, Mr. Troy, with respect to the trainings you mentioned, how often do you attend?
At least 4 times per year.
Does anyone else in your staff attend?
That depends. If they are intended for teachers, everyone goes. Sometimes people actually come to us. If the trainings are only for administrators and the teachers do not go, I'm usually accompanied by the vice principal, the superintendent, and sometimes the guidance counselors, if the attended subject matter concerns them.
You mentioned that some of the trainings and conferences encompass truancy and school offender problems. As a principal, do you have any specific duties and obligations relative to these cases?
As supervisor of attendance, I am mandated by statute to file CHIDS petitions against students in my school who are truant or disobey the rules of the school.
For what reason or reasons did you file the CHINS petition in this case?
Because Richard Ortiz had hit a student with a baseball bat while at gym class, and shortly after that had thrown a brick at another student on the way home from school.
Do you have a written policy covering these types of offenses?
Yes, we have a student handbook. As I stated, the handbook covers acts that are prohibited and prescribes punishments for these acts.
Does the handbook cover the 2 acts of violence you just described that Richard Ortiz had committed?
Objection. The best evidence is the book itself.
Your Honor, I am going to offer it, but certainly Mr. Troy is qualified to answer whether or not a student has violated a school rule.
But that goes to the merits of the case. Your Honor, the ultimate issue is whether Richard has violated school rules.
Counsel, rephrase your question.
Does the handbook address students striking other students?
Yes, it specifically prohibits fighting in school. It also provides that any student who physically assaults another will be subject to discipline, ranging from parent-teacher conference to detention or special homework assignments, to suspension and even expulsion, depending on the severity of the circumstances.
Do all students have access to this handbook?
Oh, yes. At the beginning of every school year, we distribute copies to the student. They have to bring it home and bring it back, acknowledged receipt signed by both parents and students that they have read and understood it.
Did Richard Ortiz get a copy of this handbook?
Yes, he did.
When?
First day of school.
Did he and or his parents acknowledge receipt?
Yes, he and his mother both signed the acknowledgement, and he returned it the very next day.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to introduce both a copy of the handbook and the student parent acknowledgement signed by Richard Ortiz and his mother as exhibits number 2 and number 3 respectively, and have them admitted.
Any problems, counsel?
No objections, Your Honor.
Mr. Troy, how did you come to learn that there had been a fight in gym class?
Joey Thompson, one of the students in the class, suddenly showed up in the front office. He had blood on his shirt from Anthony Romano, the child who was hurt. Joey was screaming, "Call an ambulance." Anthony's bleeding all over the place. That little asshole, Ortiz, tried to kill her.
Objection, move to strike.
Your Honor, this certainly falls under the excited utterance exception. Thompson had Romano's blood on him. He had just run from gym class to the office.
Overruled.
So, Mr. Troy, what did you do next?
First, I made sure Joey himself was not hurt. It was hard to tell at first, because there was blood all over him and he was screaming. Once assured that Joey was okay, I directed my assistant to call 911, and I headed down to the gymnasium.
What did you see when you entered the gymnasium?
Well, nothing at first, because everyone was in the locker room. That is where the incident occurred. Anyway, somehow, from the sounds, I realized that's where I needed to go. So I hurried in. And there I saw about 14 people in all, including the school nurse, Mary Alcott, who was in the shower area assisting Romano, who was sitting on the floor holding a towel over his face, and Ortiz, who was with Landers in his office.
What did you do next?
I directed Alcott to stay right where she was with Romano. As the medics were on their way, I told the rest of the students, excluding Ortiz, to go to the next class, which had just started.
What happened next?
I stood outside Landers' office, and he came out to me. Ortiz was sitting down inside. When Landers came out, he had a wooden bat in his hands.
Is this the bat?
Yes, I recognize it. It still has some of Anthony's dried blood on it.
Your Honor, I would like to admit this into evidence as exhibit number 4.
No objection.
Now, you said that Landers came out of the office with the bat, and Ortiz stayed in the office. What happened next?
I learned from Landers that Ortiz had hit Anthony before class time. But before I could learn why, the medics arrived, and we were busy attending to Anthony. They ended up taking him to Lawrence General. In the meantime, Anthony's parents and Richard's mother had been informed of the incident and were on their way.
What did you do next?
I waited till Anthony and his parents left the ambulance. Then I went to talk to Richard and Mr. Landers, who had been waiting in Landers' office at my direction.
What transpired next?
Richard admitted that he had hit Anthony with the bat. Landers was not there at the time. The students were in the locker and shower area changing into the gym clothes.
Did you learn from Richard why he hit Anthony?
Yes. Anthony and 3 others, Manuel Estefan, Leveos Rolando, and Danny Tuma, had been picking on Richard because he was the new kid, in Richard's words. I asked him if he wanted to make any complaints against any of them or anyone else, but he refused. I also reminded him that he had broken school rules and would be subject to discipline.
And was he disciplined for this incident?
Yes. First, we had a meeting with Mr. and Mrs. Romano, who indicated they wanted Richard punished, but not expelled. Anthony himself, who had suffered a broken nose, did not want to see Richard expelled. And he is an honor student. If he were suspended, he would miss class and homework as well as exams. So after meeting with Richard and his mother, we decided that Richard would attend after-school detention for a week.
And did Richard do that?
Well, he did, but not successfully.
Please explain.
Well, it really was a lot of things. The week into the detentions, he did not fully complete the assignment that the teacher, Mark Campbell, assigned. Richard and 2 other students on detention for fighting each other met in the computer lab for the week at Hamill's request. The students were required to do online research for the first 4 days related to school violence, and then write an essay on the last day of detention. Richard, however, did not write an essay at all. He scribbled at his desk, he looked out the window, and he finally turned in a list rather than an essay devoted to what teachers and administrators, not students, should do.
Mr. Troy, what, if anything, did you do after Hamill complained to you about this behavior?
I called Richard's home immediately because I wanted to schedule a conference with him. His mother answered, and I told her I would like to see him. and her, if possible, in my office the next day, as he had completed his attentions. I needed to discuss with him both ways of making sure that Richard would not resort to violence. His mother asked that the meeting be held at lunchtime, so that she would not miss any work, and I agreed.
Did you have the meeting?
Richard did not show up, because he was not in school that day. His mother showed up, and told me Richard was not feeling good and stayed home.
Did you hold the meeting with Richard's mother?
Yes, I did.
Was anyone else there?
Yes, the guidance counselor, Candace Bergeron, Mr. Hill.
What was discussed?
Objection, this is hearsay.
Overruled. I would like to hear what was discussed at this meeting as it relates to the school's decision to apply for the chins.
Go ahead.
Well, there was a new development. Danny Toomer's father had called earlier that morning to meet Richard in front of Brick and Danny as they were walking home from school. Danny narrowly missed being hit quite hard, and he fell down as a direct result and sustained a sprained ankle. Both Manuel Esteban, Leveos Rolando were witnesses to this incident. So that morning before Richard's mother came in, I spoke to all three boys, who said they were walking home after basketball practice when they saw Richard. They were all still sore at him for hurting Anthony and said things to him, like, "You get off easy, and don't go into dark alleys." But all three insisted they were not violent with him. All of a sudden, he stopped, ran over to a broken down brick wall, picked up a big brick, and threw it on her.
Did Richard's mother know about this incident?
No, she did not.
What, if anything, was decided at this meeting?
The next day, Candace and I would talk with Richard. I informed Richard's mother that I would probably be filing a chins case. I was now extremely concerned before Richard's mother revealed that she was concerned that Richard was about to be involved in the gang. She frequently worked on Saturdays. On the previous Saturday, she had seen Richard in the park while she was on her lunch break talking to some youths who she knew to be gang members. She questioned him about this later, but he insisted he was only talking to them. They ended up getting into a quarrel, whereupon Richard blurted out that if Freddie had been in a gang, he would not be dead.
Anything else regarding this meeting?
No.
Now, you stated that you were going to meet Richard the next day. Did you discuss these allegations with Richard?
Yes. I talked to him the next day. He in fact confirmed everything, even what the boys said.
Did he say why he threw the brick?
Yes. He said no one was going to get away with picking on him. He was not going to be found dead like Fred. I asked him what he meant, and he related to me the murder of his friend Fred Martinez from Cortez. When I tried to ask him any more, he clammed up.
You mentioned before that Richard turned in something that was not satisfactory according to Mr. Hamill.
Yes. He was supposed to write an essay. The subject was to be safe schools, how students and faculty can work together to ensure safety and peace. Richard wrote not an essay, but a bulleted list entitled Tips, How to Make Schools Safer. This included mostly things teachers and administrators should do. When Hamill saw the list, he asked Richard why he didn't include what students should do. Whereupon, Richard took the list, which he had drafted on the computer and had printed out, and hand wrote on the bottom, "Students should take up arms if harassed for any reason."
Your Honor, may I introduce Exhibit Number 5, Richard's paper on how to make schools safer?
Counsel?
Yes, I've seen it, no objection.
Let it be admitted.
Mr. Troy, what, if anything, did you do with this paper?
When I met with Richard the day he came back to school after the brick throwing incident, I showed Richard the paper. I explained that, besides his trying to hurt someone again, the purpose of the after-school detention seemed to have failed. Rather than his discussing ways that the students and faculty work together, he came up with a list of requirements for faculty and administration, excluding any actions on the part of students. Except for his afterthought scribbled script calling for students to respond with weapons, which really scared and concerned me.
Did Richard respond to your concerns?
Well, he said he thought he had complied with the purpose of the exercise, which was to research and then report on to make schools safe.
What did you do?
I sent him once again to Counselor Candace Bergeron, who reported to me later that due to confidentiality, she could not relate to anyone what Richard had said, but she could say that she was concerned that he was resorting to violence as a way of dealing with a multitude of personal issues.
What, if any, action did you then take with Richard?
Well, I had a meeting with his mother the day before, so she knew what my concerns were. I met once again with Richard and his mother to inform him that I was going to file a chins case.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay, now we do the cross-examination of Adam Troy by attorney Nicholas Beck. And by the way, Richard's list is going around in the last exhibit that we referred to. There's only one copy, so we'll just take a look at it and pass it. Okay, you may begin.
Mr. Troy, you testified that you attended trainings regarding student harassment, is that correct?
Yes.
And you are, I assume, familiar with the Lawrence High anti-harassment policy?
Yes.
According to this policy, is not harassment of a student by another student a violation of school policy?
Yes.
And harassment, according to your school's policy, includes harassment based on sexual orientation, is that correct?
Yes.
According to your school's policy, verbal conduct may be punishable harassment, is that not so?
Yes, that's correct.
And the group of boys who made verbal statements to Richard Ortiz in the locker room before he struck Anthony Romano, were not they making verbal remarks that qualify as harassment based on sexual orientation?
No.
It is not true that Anthony Romano, Manuel Estevan, and I don't even know how to say that, Orlando, whatever, and Danny Toomer were crowded around Richard Ortiz, taunting him about being in the wrong class. That is, asking if he wouldn't rather be in the girls' gym class.
Yes.
Would it be fair to say then that these statements either interfered with Richard's performance or with his well-being and were both threatening and intimidating?
They were only teasing him for being the new kid, in Richard's own words to me.
Your Honor, I move to strike.
Denied.
Mr. Troy, was not Richard's striking of Anthony Romano a direct reaction to these statements?
Yes.
Wouldn't it be fair to say then that Richard believed he was defending himself from harassment?
No, he never said he was being harassed then or in any later conferences with me. It was only after the school filed a Chins petition that he alleged he was being harassed.
Move to strike the answer as being unresponsive.
Mr. Troy, is it possible that Richard believed he was defending himself from harassment, whether or not he made direct statements to anyone that he was being harassed?
Well, yes, it's possible, but even if it was so, his violent actions were too severe. In both of these incidents, the results could have been tragic, and that would not justify any harassment.
Fine.
Mr. Troy, when a student responds violently to other students who have made harassing statements to him, would it be fair to say that the student is violent because his well-being has been interfered with, as the school's policy states?
No, because Richard used deadly weapons, the baseball bat and the brick, in response only oral statements.
Your Honor, I move to strike this answer as being unresponsive. My question was not whether Richard's acts were justified.
Fine. Again, Mr. Troy, you need to listen carefully and only answer the specific questions asked of you. Now, is it possible that, as your school policy states, Richard's well-being was interfered with by these students?
No, they were merely kids, as Richard said at the time to me, teasing him because he was new.
But the teasing involved Richard belonging in a girls' gym class, Mr. Troy, did it not?
Yes, it did.
And based upon your expertise with children, any male child, gay or straight, if told you belong in the girls' gym class, would certainly suffer some change in well-being, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. You may continue, Attorney Beck.
Mr. Troy, Richard Ortiz is a very good student, is he not?
Yes.
An honor student?
Yes.
Now, your policy also talks about the interference with the student's performance, correct?
Yes.
And it would be fair to say that comments such as whether he belonged in girls' gym class would interfere with Richard's performance.
Yes, but it hasn't. He's doing very well, perhaps probably the best student in his class.
Would it be fair to say that Richard, being the type of student he is, whether or not he actually performs well, as you say, he still may feel as if his performance may be interfered with if someone makes statements that are threatening or intimidating to him?
Yes.
Mr. Troy, you testified that Richard Ortiz threw a brick at Danny Tuma as the boys were walking home from school, is that correct?
Yes.
And with Danny was Manuel Estevan and Levicius with Orlando, is that correct?
Yes.
These three boys were walking together and Richard was walking alone, is that correct?
Yes.
Is it also true that the boys were walking behind Richard?
Yes.
The boys called Richard fag and queer, is that correct?
I don't know.
Would it be fair to say that the comments the boys made to Richard caused him to throw the brick?
I'm not really sure about that. Richard seems to have a lot of issues, such as the murder of his friend and his move to Lawrence.
Your Honor?
Mr. Troy, if those comments were not made to Richard and he was merely walking home in silence with the boys behind him, isn't it highly unlikely that Richard would have thrown the brick?
Yes.
Mr. Troy, as with the other incident that occurred at school, isn't it possible that Richard threw his threw this brick because he believed he was defending himself from harassment.
He may have, but his response was very extreme.
Mr. Troy, these two incidents are the only occasions where Richard had violated a school rule, is that correct?
Well, he also had the problems with detention.
But the only actual violations of school rules were those two incidents, isn't that correct?
Yes, but Richard has demonstrated through his demeanor and attitude that he is a troubled child in need of help.
Your Honor, may I have everything after the word yes struck from the record?
Yes, fine.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Okay. No, I am engaged, I am. The word fine seems very curt, I know. But all right, now, even though the assignment itself that you read before this little transcript talks about it being a motion to dismiss, obviously what we're reading is a piece of the trial. So let's sort of just discuss the issues here as a group. No need to advocate right now. My first question is, and you might want to just look at the Chin's application. So what was the basis for the school taking up the Chins in the first place? What are the elements of a Chin's case in general, and what would have been the elements in this case that the school had to prove? So how does Richard fit within this Chin statute according to the school is what I'm saying, Stephanie?
That he's a habitual school offender.
Put that in the words of the definition under the statute, and it's also in the Chin's application itself. Because you're right, I mean, that's where it came from historically, and that was the Brasher case that you guys read for last time, right? Trying to use the term habitual school offender. But what's the definition now, today, under the statute?
That he violates the lawful and reasonable regulations of the school.
Yes, in what way does he violate them? One little adverb that goes at the beginning.
Persistently.
Yeah, and actually persistently, and I don't know what version of the statute that I gave you, but it has been changed to repeatedly. What do you have in your CD? Do you have the word persistently or the word repeatedly? Look at 119, the definitions. Persistently. You do.
Section 39.
Check section 21, the definitional section, if you still have it. I don't know if you have that part of the statute with you.
Repeatedly runs away from home.
Yeah, I'll read it to those that don't have it with them. Remember when we started care and protection and we looked at some of the definitions, Chins is actually in that section. It's section 21. And it says that a child in need of services is a child between the age of 6 and 17 who, and remember the four factors or items that I put on the board. One had to deal with runaways and uses the word repeatedly. Another one had to do with obeying parents in the home. It uses the word repeatedly now, and this repeatedly
But
fails
I've
to
got the
obey.
statute printed here, it says persistently runs away. It doesn't say repeatedly.
That's what I'm saying, Mark. Persistently was changed by statute in, I can't remember what year, maybe 2-3 years ago. It's now repeatedly
Okay.
fails to obey lawful and reasonable school regulations. Just to, and the meanings are quite similar in some ways.
But
like
how
keep
recently was it changed? Because I just printed this up recently, and why hasn't it been?
119.21.
Okay.
I'm reading from the
Okay.
119.21, the definition of chins.
So it's not, they haven't changed it throughout.
But so, there's another point, right? The legislature changed it, yeah. Today it's repeated. Keep that in mind in terms of the elements of the petitioner has to show. What is the basis, other than meeting the definitional criteria of the school going in and filing a chins against Richard? How many offenses, or what facts that you've heard would fall within the school's, authority to file an action in juvenile court, and we'll talk about the standard of proof, and to be able to prove as the petitioner and get Richard adjudicated at Chins. So let's list some of the facts. Amy?
You get two. You've got the brick, where you threw the brick at the boys.
And where was that?
That was
Where did that occur?
He was walking, they were walking from the middle outside the school.
Okay. Does that ring a bell in terms of any of the cases that you read for today? So Richard's walking home, right? He's obviously has left the school grounds. So again, the school has to be able to prove that Richard repeatedly violated lawful and reasonable regulations of the school, okay? So how does walking after school, totally away from school grounds, fit under that category? Karen?
It's from a Nicholas B. case.
Yeah.
Because it was, in that case, he had assaulted another student just off school grounds, and it was right after school. So the court said because it was right after school and it was kind of a continuation.
Say that again, it was a continuation, it was something that started earlier in school.
Right.
Okay, so would the school be able to make that kind of argument here?
Yeah, well, yeah, because the hitting with that happened at school, so that event had happened.
When was the bat hitting and when was the brick throwing?
There were a couple of days in between, I think.
So does that matter that there's time in between, whereas Nicholas B. was the same day?
I would think it would matter if the brick throwing was subsequent to the bat hitting, but it wasn't, it was reversed, so I think it's a harder.
Say that again, Mark, I don't know.
Well, the brick throwing was an off-campus kind of activity after hours, and it wasn't directly related at that time to the school, but the hockey stick.
Karen's saying it's related because it's the same boys that were involved that had harassed him before and so forth.
But there weren't any instances prior to the brick throwing on school they were complaining about, am I correct? So the
There
bat,
was just the bat incident.
So I think it's a more tenuous connection compared to Nicholas B.
Anybody else?
With Nicholas B, it was a continuation of the incident in school, and in this case, it wasn't, it was reversed.
Okay. What
My
else?
argument, anyway.
What other issues do we have on the table? Well, what's the standard of proof, by the way? What's the school looking to do here, really?
To a judge of a delinquent child.
So what we just heard was a piece of the trial.
So that's the standard.
And at some point, the judge has to make a decision.
So it would be beyond a reasonable doubt, am I right? This is the criminal proceeding?
For Chins,
That's right.
Right, but what he's saying is it would turn into it could turn into a delinquent case, right? Because you could be charged, if you could be charged an adult for battery.
It depends on the age of the child.
Because in both cases,
Wait, hold on. That hasn't happened yet.
Right.
Not that it might not have, depending on, the victims involved and whether the police get involved and whether a delinquency complaint gets filed. But that hasn't happened. What's on the table and what the judge just heard was a Chins case, right? Yeah. So can the school prove, basically, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Richard Ortiz has repeatedly violated lawful and reasonable regulations of the school? Let's talk about that piece of it.
How are we going to define repeatedly?
Oh, well, all right, you want to do the repeatedly first, fine, go ahead.
Well, I simply wanted to know how the court has.
So
in the
what
past-
case law do we have to support that maybe it's not repeated conduct and it doesn't fall within the elements? What
It would be I was gonna use the second case that we have today, the flag case where it was the first case that he had a problem with that year.
Mhm.
In which case it was just one time and it seemed to work, but.
And remember, even though the older version of the statute used persistently, and so did the old case law, you can cite that to make the argument that it's not repeated, or that it is repeated type of conduct. Well, let me ask you this, just how many, when I asked before how many incidents, and I got answers, the answers I got were that there were 2 incidents, but you related to the 2 incidents where Richard had in fact, hurt another child. But what other factors would prompt a school system to be filing a CHINS? What other facts that Adam Troy talked about that it would perhaps amount to repeated violation of lawful and reasonable regulations of the school, besides him hitting another kid and him throwing a brick at a bunch of kids? And then we'll discuss his offenses or his reasons for not getting an adjudication. Karen A.
When he was given that assignment, and he did not only didn't he do it correctly, but he also at the end, alleged that little piece of violence.
What's the little piece of violence?
What did he say? That
Who has it in front of them?
Students should take up their arms or whatever, harass,
Read it out loud, Maria. You don't have to read all of what does Richard do, basically?
You want me to read the whole one?
Well, tell us sort of what he does and then.
Okay, so so he writes what the teachers should do and what the administrators should do, as opposed to what the students.
And what was his assignment, according to what Adam Troy said? What was he supposed to have done?
For the assignment. I got it here. It was, but it was basically to talk about the, let's see, I don't find the, okay, the subject was to be safe schools, how students and faculty.
When did he do this?
Wasn't that after during the school suspension?
That's right. So he had a lot of time and was told to write an essay.
And then, but the issue was that he didn't seem to be interested in writing. Like he was engaged in looking out the windows, doing different things. And then, so he came up with this list, and he said that the teachers should establish guidelines about name calling, respect, different points of view, address only comments immediately, make no assumptions about students' families or sexual orientation, recognize all families.
You don't have to read the whole list. Just tell us sort of what he did and what he wrote at the bottom of the list.
So basically, for the administrators, he basically wanted the schools to have a better approach to GLBT issues, be more involved in that, and then when talking about what the students should do, we say take up arms if harassed by anyone for any reason.
Yeah, so take up arms, read it verbatim. What is he,
So
hand right at the bottom?
If harassed for any reason.
What does that remind you of?
That the
Columbine.
Well, I didn't assign Columbine, but that's obviously a great
That's what I
come
come
back.
to.
What case does that Richard's little writing at the bottom remind you of?
Milo.
The Milo case with the little, did you see the little drawing? What else about Richard do we know that and we'll get to Richard's piece of it in a moment. What else do we know about Richard that Adam Troy testified about that again might, and remember the reasons, when we talked about the reasons for the Chin statute, was decriminalizing, behavior that could ultimately be criminal, get kids services before they engage in delinquent behavior. What other behaviors can?
His mother was afraid that he was going to join the gang.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Anything else?
And he was contemplating, he was thinking about his friend's death and his prior condition.
Okay, so let's get to him now. Amy?
Just to say, you could also use in his affidavit, he decided before he went to school, he wasn't gonna put up with any harassment.
Okay.
So he kinda already was on the defense,
Okay.
looking for a fight.
So now what are Richard's defenses here? Not so much defenses, because the burden is totally on the school to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the elements of this Chin's case. So if you're gonna make the argument now for Richard that the school failed to sustain the burden, then the judge is not gonna be adjudicating Richard at Chin's. So give me all the reasons why Richard should not be adjudicated at Chin's based on what you just heard and what you just read. Geneva?
Well, because they're arbitrarily deciding who they're gonna file a Chin's case on, or say that they're repeatedly violating lawful and reasonable regulations of the school, because obviously the kids who are name calling were violating the policy on multiple occasions as well. But they were not disciplined.
The other children were not disciplined, but Richard was.
But Richard was.
Okay. What else? Edward?
I think I would want to know if there was, as far as the refusal to do the essay, whether that was a school rule that children who were suspended were mandated to write essays, or was this the first time that that was being done? See if that was an actual policy that he violated.
Yeah, so clarification of the policy, and the handbook was, and the policies were part of the exhibits of the okay.
And they also gave him 4 days to do research online, to do this essay. He's at the top of his class academically. He probably didn't need the 4 days, and he still did a good list of what he thought they needed to do. So you could argue that he was not a Chin's case. He was a good student, been going to school. He was defending himself, which they have a right to do. And because his friend was perceived to be a homosexual, perhaps he is, or he's afraid of being that, but whether he is or not, he's a member of a protected class constitutionally, because he doesn't have to walk around with a sign on his back saying he's a homosexual. We do protection from society or the school, and the school, looking in your packet here, has a discrimination policy they were not following.
Well, what about the fact that Adam Troy testified that at some point he sort of asked Richard, well, do you want to do something about this? And Richard said, no, I can't, I won't, etc. What about that?
I think that's the big argument. School has failed, not the child.
Mhm.
But they haven't, and what Mark just started that, but the school hasn't lived up to what they've agreed to do. And that's the issue here. It's not really Richard.
And it shouldn't be up to the child on whether to punish or discipline a child for breaking school policy. It should be up to the school. It's their policy, and they shouldn't be asking a child if they want to.
And it says, in response to an act of harassment, staff members should intervene immediately. The principal should not have given Richard the alternative, the choice. Do you want me to do something about the harassment? It was his responsibility. He's the parent.
And I would argue that the principal here is discriminatory himself, just from his responses in the cross-examination, and the judge had to interject. He himself is discriminatory against Richard based on his sexuality.
What happens if the judge dismisses this case, doesn't adjudicate Richard Chin's? Are there other ways, let me ask it differently. Are there other ways that this Chin's case can be handled to ensure that Richard, who probably has been discriminated against, harassed, etc., doesn't become more violent? You know, you said
How
at
much
the
more
beginning,
violent?
Stephanie.
How much more violent can this kid get? He took a baseball bat and hit a kid to a point where other members of the students were covered with blood. He threw a brick. We're not talking about somebody who just
So, and if
strikes
you're the
somebody.
school, and this is one point I was gonna bring up earlier when we were talking about repeatedly, even though he may have, there may have been just 2 physical altercations, where they are that violent, does it fall within the repeatedly definition, just based on the seriousness of the physical events?
So I don't know if this can happen, but in juvenile court, can the judge do a clock and issue a condition that, you know?
No, because this isn't what she's talking about is continuing without a finding, which would be in a delinquency case. Now, in the package that I gave you, do I have at some point the petition issued? So, but before that point, the judge, the court, probation, the family, etc., they do have the option of some sort of informal handling in the best interest of the child, so that you don't have to come to trial and be faced again with the decision of whether to adjudicate a child chins or not. Leslie. So.
I'd like to know, like, this Candace Bergeron, the counselor, she
Right.
seems to have some really important information.
And she can't, and she's, right.
Is
No.
she's bound by some kind of protection, privilege. But
Mhm.
can the judge, like, or someone from the
It's
court,
got a
meet
care
with
protection
her?
case.
Like, what,
Yeah.
how does that work? Because obviously this kid is very violent, but he sees it as a way of saving his own life because of what he saw happen
That's
to
right.
his friend was probably something that built up and started with harassment and
That's
then
right.
ended with a death. So he wants to give the message clear to everybody. You're not gonna do to me what happened to my friend. So he's trying to scare them off before that happens to him. So it's important what he told that Candace Bergeron. That seems to me to be the whole key. He's obviously gay or,
Or perceived to be, and
perceived to
harassed,
be,
but.
or not sure.
Exactly.
And that's where all the harassment's coming from. And he obviously knows that the school is not protecting him, and he has to do it himself. So,
And chances
She's
are,
okay.
even without disclosing actual conversations, the judge knows this. The judge hearing the case knows all of the issues. But again, the question is, how does the judge handle this case?
Do they do waiver of privilege in a chins case?
I don't think so.
I don't know, I mean, I've been appointed as a GAL in a
Mhm.
chins case, but it was not for a waiver of privilege.
Mhm.
So in a care and protection.
And, okay, here's another issue that we haven't brought up. Mom, obviously, and I don't know if it was that obvious in the piece that you guys just read, but Mom doesn't know. So there's that whole situation of the kid not wanting to come out of the closet and may have disclosed, to the counselor. Kid doesn't
looks like he
want
has.
to be known. He just is very angry for a number of reasons.
Mom would have
So-
known, she would have seen the list that he created, that listed that the school needs to have anti-gay things.
It was all about.
I mean,
Whole list.
read that list and there's no way his mother isn't at least somehow included.
Well,
Easily
Oh,
Oh, come on.
Let him send it to his friend.
That's
right.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
No.
But wait a minute, what are you guys saying? Because I'm thinking something different. Go ahead.
Listen, it could have been, he could have put the gay issues down simply because of his friend that was killed for that reason, not that he's projecting that he is.
And again, the other thing that I was thinking is that depending on how traditional and whatever beliefs and whatever that the family, the parents have, parents could be totally blindfolded to, it could be exactly in denial. Very troubling case, isn't it? I gave you a site way back when in the gay youth section, We also have not only a statute, but regulations that, schools cannot discriminate, on the basis of a bunch of things, including sexual orientation. So another issue is, is Richard, depending on, well, he had a detention, if he's in danger of being suspended or whatnot, is he suspended, as a result of the school discriminating against him and not others and so forth. So that's another issue relative to this.
Because the other boys, they didn't get charged with harassment.
And so today, I mean, this case arose, and I think I told you in the first paragraph, before the anti-bullying law, and also before the, did I give you 258E, the harassment prevention statute? Mike talked about that, Kelly, a little bit. It's, okay, you don't really, if you want to take the site down, it's chapter 258E, enacted within the last few years. Juvenile court, amongst other courts, has jurisdiction of this. One issue, or perhaps one fact that maybe could have happened, depending on the players here, is one of the juveniles, maybe through their parents, might have gone into juvenile court. They're not related, they're not dating, but can apply for harassment prevention order. I know Mike talked about this because he said to you guys, well, what happens, what does the school do if one kid gets a harassment prevention order against the other kid, and they're both in the same school or in the same classroom, etc. So that might be one issue that is happening.
Yeah, he did talk about it. I brought my note on it.
Yeah, 258E. Now, under the anti-bullying statute, different requirements on the school, right? If this occurred today, what requirements does the school have regarding Richard?
I don't have the statute in front of me, but I'm guessing as a result of the anti-bullying statute, they have a responsibility to protect him from the harassment, the verbal harassment that he took from the 3 boys.
Okay. What does protect mean?
To take affirmative steps to.
What's that?
To take affirmative steps to prevent further harassment. And discipline the boys for their verbal harassment.
Would that also involve, now remember Richard's, again, reluctance to come out totally, and instead he's engaged in this disruptive, volatile, physical, violent behavior. What I'm saying is if Richard, for all of these reasons and more, is unwilling to be engaged and get the help and get the protection, what does the school do? Because under the, the school's anti-bullying plan, he'd have to be reporting stuff, right? He'd have to be doing the reporting. He has to take affirmative steps. But if he can't or won't, or again, because of all of these emotional and other reasons, everyone's thinking hard.
So can someone do it for him? Can someone advocate for him?
Amy?
Doesn't the teacher, the teacher has a right, even in their own policy itself,
Yeah.
the teacher has to punish people who did the harassment.
Yeah.
Because it came out and said, they have to intervene to stop it immediately, punish appropriately, and then continue education to the kids. So they didn't do that. They did the cleanup of the mess, but.
The cleanup of the mess.
But they never
and
addressed.
went after
They didn't go after, this was a symptom of a problem, they never fixed the problem.
But I don't agree with the statute, it says that, the 258B, that.
You're talking about harassment prevention now,
Yeah.
not the bullying statute. Go ahead.
That, they can also get a restraining order, is that something?
That's what it is. That's what 258E
So that's-
is. Yeah. 258E is like, you're all familiar with 209A when we talk about the domestic violence. So 258E allows people that, aren't related or aren't dating, to get a restraining order against, another person. And if they happen to be children, the juvenile court has jurisdiction of this. So other courts have jurisdiction of if it was adults.
But how can a school do it? How can they keep the kids away from each other in a school?
I know, that's what Michael was talking about, that, sure you can get them, but the implications,
Yeah.
legislature thinking and creating a statute that's hard to implement. But let's get back to the bullying stuff. Actually, let me ask another question, because you guys brought up that it could be delinquent behavior. So what if either the bat, or maybe even both, suppose Richard has not only the Chins case going on against him, but now also delinquency for assault and battery. And yet, again, the judge hears the case, the judge hears the facts.
For delinquency, does it have to be 14 to 17?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. How old did we say
He
he
is
was?
14.
He is,
Okay.
okay.
If not, we just make it 14. I'm sorry, no, what did you just say, Mark?
But to be in a delinquency.
Seven. Delinquency is 7 and up.
7 and up, okay.
7 to 7.
Okay.
So I know, as the judge, the reasons behind, perhaps, right? But he's violated a criminal law. And those elements are clear. Dispositional alternatives in delinquency cases are much more serious than the dispositional. Look at, in the Chins case, so he gets adjudicated at Chins. He's still gonna stay at home. He's maybe gonna get some services, maybe services where, there's a better result for him in terms of the school system and how he's treated and so forth. In the delinquency case,
He'd be going into either a special foster home or into a detention center, am I right?
You
No.
don't get, you
No.
don't get probation and continue that. If I
No.
detaining.
first of all, he wouldn't be going into a foster home. That's DC up, Mark. The Chins cases, the most serious alternative in the Chins case is to be removed from your home and placed in a foster home in DCF. And remember, under Hillary, if that's gonna be the case, then not only you, but your parents have counsel as well if they wanna fight it.
But if he's a delinquency case, then is he under jurisdiction of the Department of Youth Services? In which case, they
Perhaps,
go
and
into a
that's the
special
worst,
foster home as
that's
opposed-
the worst, most serious alternative. So a delinquency case is just like an adult criminal case for many, many reasons. The adult rules of criminal procedure apply.
Due process.
The due process, defense attorneys typically do, motions to suppress and motions to dismiss. There could be issues related to criminal responsibility, that also are issues attended in the adult hearings as well. Obviously, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, certainly even more so than the Chins cases. That case goes to trial or by plea. The least sort of serious alternative is what's called the co-op, continued without a finding, where the court will hear either after trial or, again, as a result of a plea. If it's a plea, the court will hear sort of the facts from the district attorney, and find that, there are sufficient facts for the Commonwealth to be able to prove its case. But based on this person, and again, it works for adults as well, based on this person and this person's record or no record and what this person is doing outside in school, in the community, etc., I'm not going to do anything today. I'm continuing it without a finding. I'm not making any findings, but the case remains open. Typically, it's usually a year, and through some kind of supervision, perhaps through probation and whatnot, and then the case can close out after that. So it can go from continuing without a finding to some kind of probation, to the case being placed on file, which is almost the same as a continue without a finding. Another disposition is, what am I thinking of? Well, oh yeah, that's if the Commonwealth never proved its case, there would be no adjudication at all, to ultimately the commitment to DYS. And you're right, once DYS has custody, it's still, it's retributive, but it's also rehabilitation. And DYS, has options for returning the child ultimately to home and placing in group homes and whatnot. So, but that's the thing. Even though these acts certainly are criminal, maybe the school understood that, let's not get the police involved. The parents aren't pushing it for a delinquency case. We know that, he's been intimidated, he's been harassed and so forth, but he's also hurting the kids, and there's a reason for that. One of the things that I said when we did our anti-bullying conference about almost 2 years now, we did a couple of them. One was in November 2010, and then one was in 2011. But from the perspective of the juvenile court, one of the things that I said to the people there, I said, look, bullies are victims too, regardless of, and it comes back to what's going on in the home and the school and the child and so forth. And in the anti-bullying statute itself, that's why I brought it up. If somehow the school did get involved and wanted to do something about it under their anti-bullying plan, they would be informing not only the alleged victims and their families, but the bully and their family as well, and looking for services for the quote bully in addition to the victim, and looking to the reasons behind. Because some of the kids that are defined as bullies are perhaps kids coming from abusive homes. There might be reasons for it. Why are you laughing, Kate?
Because I told my daughter the other night, she go to her room and she turned around and went, "You're a bully." I was thinking how they teach this so much in school, to the point that I tell her to do that, and that's what she calls me.
Better watch out. They'll be reporting you. You can, Renee?
When you're adjudicated a chin, do you have a record?
Well, you have a chin. I mean, it's not really a record, but there's juvenile court, and just like there's care and protection stuff going on. But it's not a criminal. It's you've been adjudicated a chins.
But if you're adjudicated delinquent, then you do have a record, and that's a huge difference for a kid.
Absolutely a huge difference.
Yeah.
So the kids that sometimes have this sort of combination things going on, sometimes the best things that the defense attorneys can do for them is to somehow work out something with both the ADAs and DCF, and DCF is involved, for the delinquency thing to sort of go away and for the chins thing to stay and get some sort of services and some sort of help so that you don't have the delinquency. Right. Yeah.
And chins is not really a bad thing. It can help a child.
It's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a bad, but then on top of that, and you've read the cases, because it's not really the bad thing, there's not very much the judges in the court system can do with them either. Because remember, the kid that is, running away and keeps running away, or truant and keeps being truant, other than, you know, DCF custody. But even DCF custody, so what? The workers can't follow the kid around constantly to make sure that they're doing what they should be doing. It's called the statute with no teeth. But it's still, in spite of its criticisms, it still hasn't been, you know, repealed or changed. I think there was some changes, but Leslie?
We were in court yesterday, and this kid had a chins, and DCF was involved, and the judge said basically to him, if you keep doing what you're doing good, he was doing better.
Yeah.
He was like 16, we're gonna, in 45 days, you're gonna come back, I'm gonna let you go back home. They brought the kid downstairs, he ran out.
Oh,
They
yeah,
all
that's
come
what
running
you're talking
back
about, yeah.
into the court.
Wait, tell the class what he said. Did you forget?
What did he say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought he said something.
I'm not going, because he was supposed to be placed in
Right.
the STAR program. He was supposed to be a foster home, but the foster home, the foster mom is no longer a foster parent.
Mhm.
So they were gonna send him to a STAR program in the meantime,
Mhm.
because they were fixing something. So he just slammed the door and left. So, I don't know.
And so the
So-
DCF worker came up, the guy, and he's like all out of breath, and he's like, Your Honor, he ran,
Yeah.
and we can't, we're not allowed to put our hands on him.
Right.
I told him, don't do this, don't do this. He ran, and the judge says right out, okay, he's remanded to DYS. Now, can she do that without having a hearing with this kid? She said to pick him up and go to DYS.
Well, he
That
got,
doesn't
they
sound
gave
right.
him a warrant.
What?
They put out a warrant for his arrest.
put out a
And
warrant.
when they do,
Okay.
sometimes they do take him to the warrant.
Didn't she say that? I heard her say it.
She was
Montague.
supposed to bring him back into court, but since he's.
Well, if
down
they're
in
running,
court-
Chin's kids can be arrested
Yeah.
Oh,
if
they
they're
put out
running.
warrants.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, and that's what happened.
She said, yeah, DYS.
So let's do we may or may not have a speaker on Thursday, but let's do that Hallie Wright. I sent you the Hallie Wright hypothetical, so we'll do that for Thursday. Yeah. Even if I start delinquency, I've sort of already talked about it a little bit, and the only reading you had to do initially for delinquency was the statute. So you don't have to get to the cases yet, okay?
Statute.